From the Tennessee State Capitol to Capitol Hill in D.C., from courtrooms to classrooms, and now across all corners of the state of Tennessee, Dr. Alfred Degrafinreid has been on a mission to serve. But his journey didn't begin with a title or a platform. It began with one of the most under-resourced communities in Tennessee, where hardship forged his resilience and loss shaped his sense of purpose. Today, Alfred is president and CEO of Leadership Tennessee, where he's leading a statewide network of changemakers committed to bridging divides and building a better future together. In this conversation, Alfred shares stories and lessons from a career that spans every level of government, from higher education and now nonprofit leadership. We talk about learning when to speak and when to listen, finding your voice even when you're the least experienced in the room, and what it really means to lift as you climb. Whether you're an aspiring leader or a seasoned executive, or even someone who simply wants to make a difference in your community, this episode is for you. Alfred, thank you for being here today. It's good to see you.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you for having me.
I'm used to seeing you on the stage at Rotary, and you are typically surrounded by throngs of admiring fans. So I don't often get to see you this close or have this much time with you, but know you as a person who has a wide network and a network that respects you tremendously. And when I was thinking about your career trajectory over the last several years, as I've worked in nonprofits and government posts throughout Nashville and Tennessee, yours is a name that constantly comes up as a person that is always at the center of conversations, both in terms of having an impact and is just a person that is appreciated and respected to be around, that your voice and your reputation has always been a value add to these conversations. So I'm excited to hear the ways we dive a little bit more deeply into that today.
Thank you. Being kind, but I appreciate you.
100% true. It's always, have you heard from Alfred on this issue, or where's Alfred on this thing? You grew up and have talked about growing up in one of the most under-resourced parts of Tennessee. What from that season of your life continues to shape your leadership today?
Well, thank you for the question. I talk about my upbringing a lot in Memphis and in North Memphis in 38127, which happens even to this day to be one of the least performing zip codes in terms of socioeconomic status. But what's interesting about that, and to answer your question, is even though I grew up in that type of environment and in that neighborhood, my parents really didn't, they didn't allow us to say, oh, well, feel sorry for us because we come from this zip code. They always said, you will not be defined by your zip code, and you can be anything you want to be if you work hard. So those types of lessons are things that I think have helped me become who I am today. One of the beauties of growing up without a lot of means is that you figure out if you want something, you have to get it yourself, because nobody's just sitting there giving you anything. And that really also probably shaped my faith as well, my faith system, and how often we were in church and how grateful we were for everything that we did have. So I think you have to be resilient, and you have to figure out how to get things done the best way for you and not compare yourself to other people.
I resemble that remark in a lot of ways, that if you want something, you have to go get it, but you also get the benefit of not knowing entirely what you're missing and what you don't have. So the mindset of, oh, I don't have this thing or I don't have this thing. If things don't feel like options for you, it's easier to just say, I'm functioning in the space that I'm at, and,
right.
And you don't necessarily miss those things. You made a reference to your parents and the way that they framed your economic conditions and the environment that you lived in, and how that didn't define who you were, who you would become. But you lost your father at 14. And I've heard you say before that created a fork in the road moment for you. How did it crystallize your vision for the life that you wanted? And once crystallized, how did you make it happen?
Well, it was a very tough time. So I just kind of to paint the picture, and I don't go this deep that often, but I'll take it there today. So I actually lost my father on my 14th birthday. So if you can imagine waking up to your birthday and you know, hearing your parents sing happy birthday to you, whether it's on key or off key, having a conversation. One of the last conversations I had with my father was, well, actually two things stick out to me right now. The first thing was I was getting ready to go to school. My mom is a retired school teacher, so she would always take us to school before she'd go to her school. And I was getting ready to walk out the house, and my dad said, "How much money do you have in your pocket?" I said, "Well, really, I don't have anything." He said, "Let me teach you a lesson, son." He said, "Here's $20. He said, "You always have money in your pocket on your birthday." He said, "I'm not worried about the other days, but you always have to have money in your pocket." And he knew I'm really a saver. So it sticks out that he said, "Son, I want you to go to school and spend this money and get you some, popcorn, things they sell, cinnamon rolls in high school." He said, "Because you'll be trying to save that $20. He said, "You just go out and just enjoy your birthday." And then I went out to the car, and then I ran back in the house because I forgot my backpack. And he said, "Son, you forget your head if it wasn't attached to your body." And that was the last conversation we had. He told me he loved me, and that was really the last time we spoke. And you learn a lot from that lesson. I mean, I don't want to get too far ahead, but I didn't learn about adverse childhood experiences until I went through Leadership Tennessee in 2019. And they kept talking about ACEs this. And I'm like, okay, remind me again, what are ACEs? I mean, I don't know what they are. I lived adverse childhood experiences. I've seen it firsthand. But it really didn't impact me in a way. I never missed a meal. I always had clothes. We vacation, we travel. I also had a unique experience where my grandfather lived about 45 minutes north of Memphis in Tipton County, where we have 250 acres. So we had farm animals. So I got to really experience a lot in terms of being in an urban setting and a rural setting. So just having those experiences growing up really taught me, because when you go to a rural area, it's really not a lot to do. This is before PlayStations. I may have had a Game Boy without color, or Nintendo, but you really didn't have a lot of things to do other than riding your bike and going outside and maybe looking at the animals or actually throwing rocks. Those were the things we do in those areas. So when I think about my upbringing, I'm so blessed and so fortunate that I had 14 years with my father and still talk to my mother every single day. And it even surprises her when she says, I'm just so shocked that you turned out the way you did, given all the hardships you experienced growing up. And I'm so proud of you. And I say, "Mom, don't worry about that. I'm just trying to make you proud and be a good husband, be a good father to my kids, and also be someone in the community who understands that a rose can grow from the concrete. Like you don't have to be born with the silver spoon in your mouth to be able to do things. You just have to have the drive and the motivation." I think what happens most times or most often is that people think because they have an area of lack that transcends everything. I love to see new things. I love to experience things that are just ethereal experiences. One that I can share right now was the first time I went to New York. It was 1991. And I will never forget my parents talking to me about the Big Apple. I just knew I would see this Big Apple. Got to New York and I was like, this is a lot of buildings. But secretly, I was going to take a bite of that apple, because I'm thinking, what is the Big Apple? But I got a chance to experience that, to see the Statue of Liberty, to, go into Harlem, to go to the Apollo, which was still pretty popular. The Apollo Theater was very popular back in the 90s and even before then. But to go and just do things that was so different from Memphis. Like when you think about the landscape of a New York City, in the Memphis, Tennessee, or even in Nashville for that matter, or any city in the state, it's no comparison to New York in terms of how many people are there, how many buildings are there. And that was an eye-opening experience that made me think, wow, there's more to life than just being here in this little pocket of Memphis. I knew I would leave Memphis at some point because my mom said all her kids had to at least leave Memphis for 1 year. Mm. A lot of people don't have parents that say, you need to go and explore the world and see something different. If you want to come back, fine. but you have to leave for 1 year.
Yeah, that's interesting. You talk a lot about the things that you envisioned and the opportunities that you saw, and I think you're now leading a nonprofit and CEO of Leadership Tennessee. I've talked to other nonprofit leaders before about how organizations think about scarcity mindset, and you could really approach a lot of these problems both organizationally or personally as I'm in a deficit, I've got scarcity, or I've got opportunity. And having an approach to those sorts of challenges with an opportunity mindset opens the door for you to be creative and nimble and move into a bunch of different things that you might not have seen before.
Absolutely.
And go to the Big Apple and think about, okay, this may not be Memphis, this may not be Nashville, but there's something here that is bigger than what I'm used to. And I can chart a path because I can see something now that I didn't previously see. You have worked across all levels of government. What has surprised you about how real change actually happens inside of those systems?
Well, the most apparent one was when I worked at the legislature. I had the pleasure of working for a fascinating legislator, probably arguably one of the best to ever do it. And her name was Loudest. And she was a speaker pro tem. I mean, she just really knew how to get things done. She was tough, and I needed that toughness. But what I realized was that outside of that office and a few others, lobbyists were the ones who were making all the change. Like, that was my biggest thing. And even on the federal level, you still see there aren't many members of Congress who are actually writing legislation. You know, it's usually something that comes in on a packet from outside people who have interests. So that was one of the things that I was really surprised about on those levels. But locally, I think, and I'm happy to go on the record about this, Nashville has been so successful, and I think it's because of consolidation of government 60 years ago or close to 60 years ago. If it's not broke, why try to fix it? I actually really enjoyed, I'm one of the few people who enjoyed lobbying the Metro Council with 40 members, 35 council districts, 5 at large, and the vice mayor. I really understood organizational theory, and that's one of my things. And when you, but I also had a great client too. When you represent a great institution like a Vanderbilt University, it's pretty easy to talk to a lot of people because you have people who are fans of the university. You have people who live by the university. It's always something exciting about college campuses. So it's like that ecosystem for just a lot of fun and cool things. So it was exciting to really learn like how infrastructure works, how pipes operate, you know, sewage lines and stormwater drains, and, you know, how utilities run above ground and underground, and, you know, alleys and street name changes and things of that nature, or imploding buildings. That was always like some of the most fun things to do in a role like being an associate vice chancellor at Vanderbilt. I really cherish those moments because we got a chance to just do a lot of creative work. And I want to go back to something you said a second ago, which is a little bit outside of government, but even in my leadership role at Vanderbilt, we had some pretty nice resources to do things in the community and to do things just with budgets. And I was always very cautious about, just because we have resources don't mean we have to spend them. You know, like, what's the way to cut a little bit of this out so that we can have more to impact the community rather than spending it on this? So that was a big mindset shift for my team that I inherited. Some of them were like, well, I always spend money on this and I'm always a sponsor for this. I'm like, but what's the return on investment? Or what's the return on impact? Like, are we really just doing this because we've always done it? Or should we really be just laser focused or take a scalpel approach to things rather than the axe approach? Like, really figure out what's the best way to get things done. And I think a lot of that comes from my upbringing. Like, you don't have to have a lot to do a lot. You know, sometimes you can have a lot and you can do more by saying, we're going to cut this back over here so we can have more on this side. So those were things that, like, in terms of being a leader, I've just had great mentors and bosses and people who believed in me to do good work. But you have to open your mouth to be able to share what you know. A lot of people sit in the room and just take up space. Yeah. I'm glad I'm not built like that.
Yeah. I think to your point about being at an organization that has a lot of resources, having those resources doesn't impugn wisdom in how you spend it, or even impact. And being able to discern the difference, to your point about the return on investment, is critical. You made a point about Representative Lois DeBerry, and it made me remember a moment that I had with her as a baby lobbyist. And I walk into her office, and Tennessee had started to shift in terms of its political makeup in the legislature. And Representative Berry sat me down and said, Mr. Lister, you are new at this, and you're probably going to win this issue that we were talking about. But the choices that you make today and the ways in which you win this battle will define your career. So make wise choices. And I'm paraphrasing, but
right.
she was direct and soft but stern in the way that she acknowledged the position that her viewpoint was in on the particular legislation we were advocating for, but also took the time to provide some unsolicited and welcomed advice for a person that she had no relationship with, that she didn't know very well, but recognized that I was a young person and didn't have a lot of experience. And I always appreciated that and held her in high regard. Was a woman and a representative that was just always functioning at a really, really high level. And
can I give you a corollary to that?
Absolutely.
So when I was working for her, I was actually loaned to go work in the Senate for a state senator who had lost a staffer. And he was so excited to have me there because he was like, oh, man, I'm going to be able to get her to co-sponsor my legislation. So he gave me the packet and he said, hey, I want you to go and talk to Speaker Pro Tem and ask her to support this legislation to co-sponsor it. And I knew it, but I didn't know it that well. So as a person who just left her staff for a moment, I came downstairs to her office. This one we were in Legislative Plaza, and the my senator's office was in the War Memorial Building. I walked in the office and talked to her, and I said, well, I want to talk to you about this bill. And she started peppering me with questions, and I didn't know the answer. And she looked at me she always had these round glasses on. She looked over her glasses and she said, let me tell you something. She said, you have a relationship with me. She said, but don't you ever come into my office and not know your stuff. She said, you will not disrespect me like that. And I said, yes, ma'am. And from that point, I knew that if I talked to her about legislation again, I had to come with it. It didn't matter if I had a relationship. Right. It didn't matter if I was from Memphis. It didn't matter if I had the nicest suit on at the time. She said, you better know your stuff when you come into my office or I'm not supporting it. And she said, that was one of the most valuable lessons that I learned from her. Like, you can't play around with people. Like, you can't waste people's time.
Yep. It probably could spend all day on kind of versions of those stories. And she was really good at that and always delivered it in a kind way. I want to connect to something you've talked about before and some of those experiences about you and I both being early in our careers. You've talked about being the youngest person in the room many times early in your career. How did you build trust and influence in those environments?
Well, I think really and I talk to young people about this all the time. I think that, you have to know what you don't know, but you also have to know when to add value. It's always like I've read a lot of political books and, things on business and politics run hand in hand. So I read a lot of leadership books. I read a lot of business development books. I read a lot of, leadership development books, but they're all similar. When you walk into a room and you know more than everybody else, you're probably not coherent because there's a lot of people that know a lot of things. But you have to intersectionality is such an important concept because my perspective on things are shaped by my life experiences. It's kind of the nature versus nature perspective, right? Like it's shaped by what I had to go through. So when someone wants to talk about, I'll give you a good example because I talk about community relations a lot because I've been good at that and I've done it for years. You don't go into a community and tell them, hey, this is what I think you need. You have to go into the community and talk, build relationships and listen, and then figure out what they need help with. You can't just walk in and say, hey, I think you need this. And that's a valuable lesson. And I take that same concept into being at the boardroom table. You know, I sat around tables for many years and I was like, well, I want to say something, but I'm not going to say it for fear of ticking somebody off. Then eventually every boss I worked for all said, look, I didn't hire you for you to come in here and look pretty. I hired you for your brain power. Like, I need you to step up and say things. Don't feel afraid to say how you feel about things. That doesn't mean that we're going to go with your idea, but we need you to add value. Even in Ms. DeBerry's office, she'd always say, you represent my office. So you have to walk around here like you represent my office and you know what you're doing. So when I think about sharing my vantage point, I'm not afraid to do so. I'm not afraid. I don't have to be combative about it. I'm just say, well, you know, all my people will always say to me, I know when you don't agree with something because you'll say, I don't necessarily agree with that. Because they'll say, when you say that, I know for a fact that you don't agree with it, but you're trying to be nice by saying you don't necessarily agree with it. But I'm always going to say, this is why I don't agree with it. I could be wrong. You might be right, but I want you to convince me that I'm wrong. It's nothing wrong with having civil discourse or engaging in dialogue. That's what I live for. I don't have to argue and debate on things that don't mean anything to me. But if it's something that I care about, it takes the time to really get to talk to someone if you want substantive change, because a lot of people don't want change, number one, and a lot of people can't adapt to change. And if you figure out how to do those things, because everything that's one constant is there's going to be change. If you figure out how to deal with change, it's going to help your career.
I remember a moment you talked about a boss hiring you for brain power. I walk into a room one time, there's a number of folks assembling around a table, and I took a seat with a staffer's mindset at a chair against the wall. And my boss at the time turned and looked at me and asked me to sit at the table. Yes, I'm fine, thank you. And in front of this room with many folks whom I respected and were in far more advanced stages of their career, now have turned their attention to me. And he says again, but more forcefully, you either sit at this table if you're in this meeting or you get out, that you're not here to be an ornament. And it was an indication to me that we don't participate in things that we don't add value to. And that if folks thought it was important or that I could add value to a conversation, I had a responsibility to be in a position to add value to that conversation, not just to sit back and take notes. Maybe that was my role in one meeting. Maybe that was my role in 100 meetings, but that wasn't the reason I was here. And to make that shift into being able to impact and be a leader in these sorts of conversations, you had to kind of take a step that might be a little bit uncomfortable, and thinking about recognizing why you're in a room and why you're not in a room is important. You have been in a lot of different roles, and we've talked about those a little bit before, but I've seen you say before that you expected to move to Washington, D.C. after earning your master's degree, but that life took you in a different direction. What did you learn from that unplanned detour, and how has it shaped the way that you think about the work that you're doing now, which is more intensely focused on building Tennessee?
Well, I would just say that a lot of times you have to really, like I mentioned before, that I'm a person of faith. You know, God's plans for you are his plans. A lot of times you think that you want to do things and it may not come to pass. So I was very interested in moving to DC right after I finished my master's degree and had an opportunity. I just left from working for the Speaker Pro Tem, and I had an opportunity to go and work for Congressman Cooper in his DC office. And it was a legislative staffer position. And I just received my master's degree, and I was like, "There's no way I'm going to move to DC and make $25,000 when I'm making much more than that in Nashville." And I felt like I was still in poverty. So how could I move to DC? So I declined the offer, and I regretted it. Oh man, I regretted it. I was like, man, I should have taken that opportunity. And then what happened was I ended up taking the LSAT and going to law school in Indiana. And I really enjoyed that experience, getting out of Tennessee for a little bit. And I got the opportunity finally I worked at a law firm for a year, which I absolutely hated. I learned my first year of law school that I did not want to be in a law firm. I worked at a small plaintiffs firm. Very good partner I worked for. I did great work for. It was basically workers' compensation, disability insurance benefits, and some bankruptcy. And I was the law clerk for a year, my first year of law school. And while I was good at it, I just didn't feel like I was passionate about it. So then I had the opportunity for the first time in my life to be a lobbyist in Indiana for a trade association. So I applied for it and I was selected. They always hired 2 law students to do the lobbying. And because I'd worked in the state of Tennessee, I was a shoo-in for the position. And I was able to really get some legislation passed they've been working on for 20 years. And if you think about and you've lobbied before and maybe in multiple states, but each legislature is basically the same. You have a Senate and you have a House, and it's 2 chambers, and they have to pass bills together. Then the governor signs it and becomes law. And that whole process has always been intriguing to me. So I get to Indiana. Everybody looks different, but they carry the same persona. So getting that experience in Indiana really helped me out a lot. And then between my second year law school and third year, I came back and worked on Mayor Carl Dean's reelection campaign. So at that point, I was able to really see I knew how to do GOTV work. I'd done campaigns before, Get Out the Vote, for those who don't know what GOTV is. But I also got to be the person who moved around the city and built partnerships and connections with everybody in the campaign. So did that between my second and third year. And then when I graduated, I moved back and was hired as legal counsel to Congressman Cooper. So the point I'm trying to make with that whole story, I hate to take you around the world, but I was upset and really regretted the fact that I didn't get a chance to move to DC, but I still got a chance to work in that office with a fantastic legislator who knew how to write legislation himself, who could get legislation passed and really understood the process. He'd been there a long time, and he really gave me, and I really appreciate Jim for this, he validated me in a lot of ways, because when I go to Dixon, he had just picked up Dixon County. I didn't know anybody in Dixon. And frankly, a lot of people didn't look like me in Dixon, but they love me. I'm still friends with the mayor, the county mayor, and several others there in Dixon County. But I got there and people were so welcoming to me. And they just really appreciated that the congressman from Nashville would have a staffer in Dixon every week working with them. So my point was, moving to Indiana really helped me, in some areas that I didn't have. And I got to see a different perspective, kind of like what I talked about earlier with leaving Memphis and going on vacation in New York several times as a kid and traveling to Chicago. I didn't talk about that, but going to different places that I got to see things that were differently. So those things are very impactful in terms of how I make decisions on things, because Indiana's really not that different from Tennessee. We're just 4 hours away from my law school. I could leave my house and get there. It's an hour change, but still 4 hours in the car. So I really enjoyed that piece. And it also gave me some credibility when I came back here, because I got to do some things in another state, probably the same type of credibility I would receive if I would have moved to DC. Like, when people live in DC and they come back to Nashville, it's like, oh, they're smart. They've lived in DC, and getting the opportunity to work in DC with the congressional office and to travel up there sometimes and to have a legislative portfolio. That's not something that everybody gets when they're in the district. I actually handled the music and intellectual property portfolio. And that was some tough stuff. I mean, but think about the music industry here. You think about Music Row. And that's when I noticed, take a quick aside. I knew Nashville was special, but I did not know Nashville was special until I was getting ready to fly to DC to meet with people about legislation. And they all said, we'd rather come to Nashville. I'm like, why would you come here? You're in DC. They're like, no, we'd rather come here. And that was 2012 to 14. So we're talking over 10 years ago. And the city continues to be on this upward trajectory. And it's a world-class city now, which it wasn't, and maybe it was back then, but I don't think people viewed Nashville the same way they do today.
Yeah, we recently got back from a family vacation to Milwaukee and bumped into, between staff at the hotel and wait staff or folks at the airport. Every time a person knew or found out that we were from here, they either had a story about wanting to visit or a trip that they had planned or a person that they knew. And it was interesting to kind of reflect on that in an elevator riding down to the car one day. It's like, man, it's easy to forget the gym that you live in sometimes. But I'm curious about your DC story, because what I hear when you talk about that is a recognition that pivot was probably good for you retrospectively. When you are in the moment and an opportunity doesn't go as expected, how do you discern in real time whether to push forward or to pivot? And how do you feel comfortable and confident in those decisions?
Well, when you make a decision, you always have to stick with the decision. You can't make a decision and go back on it, right? So I knew that when I got to Indiana, for instance, I'm going to go back to Indiana for a second. I knew that I wasn't going to stay in Indiana. I knew I was always coming back here, maybe go to DC. I knew I didn't want to go to Atlanta. I knew there was a few places I just didn't want to go, but making a decision to go and do something, I looked at the city. I looked at Indianapolis and I said, they have a state capitol. They have professional sports. The downtown is pretty vibrant. This is similar to where I live. Now, they're not necessarily comparative cities if you think about it. Maybe when you talk about convention centers, they have a lot of convention space. So we're in competition with them sometimes from that perspective. But I just knew that going there, I built relationships with the congressman there. I met judges, I met partners at law firms. I knew all the lobbyists. Like everything that I did here, I just replicated it in that city. So I feel like whether I would go to DC or any other city, I would probably replicate the same thing because of the circles I run in. So that move was probably the hardest because I had family members who would tell me, you got to be careful in Indiana. It's a tough place to go and live. And I wasn't worried about that. I'm like, I'm going to school, I'm going to be in the library most of the time. But you have to, I guess I want to be pointed on answering your question. When you make a decision, whether it's a life, everything's a life decision, where you go to school or if you buy a car, like I know myself well enough to know, Adam, that I don't make big decisions without taking a 24-hour break. And I learned that from the partner at the law firm I worked for. Whenever she was faced with a big decision on something, she said, Alfred, I always take 24 hours and think about it. And I took that. So even if I go and try to buy a car, I'm going to go and look at the car today. And then the car salesman's going to say, well, it might be gone tomorrow. I say, well, that wasn't God's will for me to have this car. So like on big decisions, I always have to think about it. Like I never wanted to leave Tennessee. I want to just make like for law school. I did want to go live in DC. But I wanted to go to UT for law school. I was waitlisted. So when Indiana called me with the slide, I took it. I said, you know what? I want to go. If I say I want to do this, I need to make the decision right now. I need to go and get me an apartment. I need to relocate. And I was dating my wife, then girlfriend, she stayed here while I was in law school, so we commuted. So that was a tough transition to just pluck myself from here and go to another city where I literally know no one. And but I made the best of it. And I think that you have to sometimes step out on faith for things you want. A lot of people say, oh, I always wanted to get a PhD. Well, get it. I'm not trying to be negative about it, but if you want to do something, you have to take that first step. You just can't, you can't talk about things. You have to be about it. And I would even say I don't know where you're going next, but even to leave a institution like a Vanderbilt University as an associate vice chancellor to come and run Leadership Tennessee was a huge step for me too. I realized in my mind, you went through my history and my background, I realized I'm probably built to be a number two. I love being a number two. I love to get the work done and let everybody else take the credit because I don't want to take credit for anything. It kind of makes me uncomfortable. So, but I had the desire, like, can I be a number one? Can I step outside of my comfort zone and be a number one? And I think people who know me will say, he's full of it right now. I love a microphone. I love to lead meetings. I love to chair boards. I love to do things like that. But that doesn't mean I have to be the center of attention. I just like process, right? That's why I, at one point, thought I'd be a great legislator. Because I'm like, I know how to work with people. I know how to get things done. I can see things, and since I've grown up, I realized I never want to be a legislator or an elected official. But I can do a lot more good doing things in the community and helping others than most elected officials could ever do.
Yeah, I think the challenge of leading an organization in my mind and kind of thinking about that number one versus number two is I feel very similarly that I always felt most comfortable when I wasn't the focus of either an accolade, certainly criticism. Nobody enjoys those sorts of things, but the accolades in particular, that it was always easier and more comfortable for me to put the organization or the work number one. And that was helpful for my mindset to think that I am here to be the best positioned lever or the best positioned advocate for this thing, that the organization and its mission lives beyond me and existed before me, that making it about yourself is the surest way to bring the organization down.
Absolutely.
And it was a helpful way for me to think, yes, you may be sitting at the top of the organizational chart, but in a lot of ways you are a steward of and have a responsibility for helping to ensure the organization or the mission succeeds. And it gives you both a challenge and permission to not be an egomaniac. And I think that is a thing that certainly you and I have been in and around politics and organizational leadership for a long time. There are times when folks do that really well and their organizations succeed. There's times when they have that orientation and the organization still struggles. And then there's certainly times where folks will use their position or their place in an environment or in an organization to lift themselves up. And it's so obvious to the people around them, and the organization and the work often suffers. Looking back on these sorts of things, kind of historically, you can see where leaders can step in and really lift themselves up. And I think as most of the folks that listen to this are in some form of leadership or advocating for community impact, it's important to be able to understand how to lean in and push in those ways, but also feel uncomfortable about being in a number one position. You mentioned Vanderbilt a little bit and talked about engaging with the Nashville Council, and which has been referred to as a difficult place to make policy changes. But one of the things that I think gets lost in the government relations space when people think about how that works and how lobbyists engage and how advocates engaged is the importance of listening and diplomacy in that work. So I'd love to get your perspective on how you bridged the university with city government, and where or when a time where listening and diplomacy really helped advance the organization's work, but then also had a potential benefit for the community as well.
Well, I would say that, I didn't create these things, but one of the things I really enjoyed doing the mayor's race, we would host a candidates forum on campus and invite the community out. And I've been going to these since I was in college. The mayoral candidates, the at-large candidates, and the district candidates will all be invited to Vanderbilt, or initially it was a park. I think it may be a parking garage now, but it was a park where everybody would set up their tables and they get a chance to go to the microphone and share their platform. And I thought it was a beautiful thing from the beginning, even to the last time I participated in it, because it shows you about democracy. You bring people to your campus, and then you bring all the elected officials to your campus, and then they get to see all the people who live around the community. It was one of those things that people said, I'm not missing that because I need to get some voters to show up. That was one thing. I think another one would be, we would host the Metro Council on campus. A lot of people may not know this. I worked for enough mayors and, elected officials and others, legislators, that you really don't know how to be an elected official when you're elected. You have this platform, but it doesn't go out the window, but you have to learn how to embrace the role. So there are a lot of schools that teach you how to be a mayor. I think Harvard has a mayor's college. I think other institutions have that. So the version at Vanderbilt was, they would always host the elected officials, the council members, and the department leaders from Metro government on campus. And then the council members would sit there in a room for several hours, and then they would learn from the water department, or learn from NES, or hear from the head of the Chamber of Commerce, even though it's not a governmental office, but the work that they're doing. So that was something that I think highly benefits just the city in general, because like when you have a large council, a lot of people don't understand parliamentary procedure. They don't understand, how many steps it takes to first reading, second reading, and things like that, or how you make amendments. So they really give you the knowledge to learn that. And I would say also, they were just so fantastic about hosting incredible speakers on campus. I would go to them before I ever worked at Vanderbilt and hear leaders from across the nation come. So those things that's a perfect example of how our university can share those resources with the community at large. And it also opens up minds to students. Like, wow, this is a campus that's right here. It's almost like a city within a city. People could see, like, that could be me one day. I could go to that university. Like, I finished my doctorate from Vanderbilt. I never would have thought in a million years that I would have a degree from Vanderbilt. Like, I'm a proud Tennessee State University alum. I have 2 degrees from Tennessee State, and none of that would be possible without, other degrees wouldn't be possible without TSU. It's a strong institution. And I learned just as much from TSU as I did from Indiana and from Vanderbilt. Like, I don't want that to be missed in my conversation, but like, state school is a HBCU, and everyone in my family, for the most part, who went to college went to Tennessee State. So it's a legacy thing for me. My siblings went to TSU. My mom went to TSU. So like, I have a lot of pride. I'm proud that I'm a TSU grad. I'm a double tiger is what I like to call myself. But my point is, that's what prepared me for the next step when I got to Indiana law. That's what prepared me for the next step when I got to Peabody doctor education program. So like, those things, like, education is the great equalizer. I know you had Randy Boyd on here a while ago. The work they're doing at UT is incredible. I mean, we're fortunate to have him leading the system, and he's also a Leadership Tennessee alum. So like, education is something that really, like, if you look, there are books on just the history of higher education. When you think about a land of farmers and clergymen to where we are today, it's a big difference on why schools were created in the beginning to what they're used for today.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think about the ways in which a university plugs into the community and that folks never see, and how important that is to kind of leaning into other gaps that may exist. And I think we take for granted and the importance of nonprofit organizations like yours currently. You're recently celebrated your third anniversary at Leadership Tennessee. The importance of an organization like that to help build and create stability and strengthen leaders, both in hard and soft skills, critically important. Same on the university side. I was literally talking about it last night with my son. The first college classroom I ever stepped into was when I was 12 at a merit badge university at Vanderbilt University, and learned citizenship of the world and a couple of other merit badges that helped me progress toward my Eagle Scout. You have talked a lot about, and we've talked a lot about, listening and silence. I'd love to transition a little bit into more direct conversations that you might have had in the past. You've advised political leaders, and now you lead a statewide nonprofit with Leadership Tennessee. What is the most impactful piece of strategic advice that you've ever received, and how do you think about implementing that in your work today to continue to advance your organization's mission?
I would say some of the most strategic advice that I received has been just be authentically you. Like, I was fortunate to have a predecessor who was fantastic. Her name's Kathy Kate. She was the founding executive director of Leadership Tennessee. And she's very unselfish with telling me how things were. And also I went to, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, I graduated from the 2019 class of Leadership Tennessee signature program. We were the original COVID class. So when you think about just bringing a bunch of type A personalities into a room, a bunch of people who aren't used to being told no, a lot of people who control their own calendars, and then they have to basically say, while I'm in this group, I'm gonna do exactly what the agenda says do. That's really a remarkable thing to see, because being a leader, like, everyone can become a better leader. It's not like, you become the top leader in the world. No, you still have principles on leadership that can make you a better leader every single day. And I want to just say this for our signature program. It's a misnomer. We're not necessarily teaching people how to be leaders. The premise is you're already a leader before you're selected. But what we can do is show you how leaders across the state have moved on various topics to make our state better. The beauty of Leadership Tennessee is it's a nonpartisan organization that's geared towards looking at the good, the bad, and the ugly with hopes of solving those problems. It's not guaranteed that the problems will be solved, but when you bring creative leaders together from different backgrounds, you have entrepreneurs, you have college presidents, you have healthcare executives, you have educators, you have lawyers, you have engineers, like, you have so many different people with different thought processes. And they can probably all solve problems the way they want to very quickly by themselves. But when you have people, 45 or so across the state, who have different backgrounds, some are rural, some are in Northeast Tennessee, some are in Memphis, right? Or from Tiptonville to Copper Hill. That's the other direction of the state. A lot of people don't say that. Like, you can really learn a lot from people just based on what they see every day, because my reality in Nashville is probably different from everywhere else in the state. I've noticed that a lot of people know what's going on here in Nashville. They keep up with what's going on in Nashville. But if you ask someone in Nashville what's going on in Johnson City, they may not know. And like, it's just, we are so fortunate to be in a state like a Tennessee, where we have so many valuable assets. All 95 counties are different. Once you cross the county line, you have a whole nother set of issues. And you know this because you traveled probably to all 95 counties like I have. But the beautiful part of an organization like this and other community leadership programs is that you have to strip all your titles at the door. You leave that outside and you come in as Adam, I come in as Alfred. And we talk about tough issues with hopes of improving the state. And that's just a beautiful thing. And I'm on the national board of the Association for Leadership Programs. So I'm in community with other statewide programs, other citywide chamber-based programs, university programs. I feel like I have my finger on the pulse of what's going on in the country because I have a network of people who engage all the leaders from their cities and states. So it's interesting to see how Tennessee is different from a Washington state or Florida or Texas, right? Like I get to see that on a regular basis. And it's truly like, it was such a great thing to celebrate 3 years at Leadership Tennessee. Time flies by when you're having fun, but I know for certain that things are getting better in terms of people talking to one another, because right now people don't talk. Like I make sure at my dinner table that my 9 and 7-year-old get to talk about things, and we have worldly discussions, my wife and I, with them, and we let them talk about what they want to talk about. And we also talk to them about things we think they should know. Like, I wonder how many people still have dinner time with their kids. Isn't that a strange thing?
Yeah, it really is. And it's some of the most valuable minutes of my day. Sometimes it comes back to bite us because we'll raise questions and conversations that my wife and I may look at each other and think, gosh, I'm not really prepared to have this level of a discussion at this moment, but it's their world. They're going to inherit it. Let's talk about it. Your point about community in Leadership Tennessee and in the association that you're involved with, I think is so interesting because you've also talked before about how you don't compete with anyone, but you compete with yourself. And I think what you're doing at Leadership Tennessee and the way that you frame some of those opportunities is really valuable, because it would be tempting for folks in that cohort to feel like they're in competition with each other rather than being in community with each other. But they are in competition with themselves to make themselves better and to make the organizations that they serve better. And you coming with that frame of mind and understanding the relationship and the temptation to be in competition with your cohort members or with other association directors as opposed to being in community with them, I think is an important distinction. And it challenges you in the through line of the things you've been talking about to just always challenge yourself to be better, that you're the one that's going to be responsible for that. Thinking back over the course of all of the roles that you've had, from campaign work to administering courtrooms and now serving as a nonprofit CEO, I'm curious if you could help me understand what is the thread that has connected all of those, and how do we think about applying that to whatever unknown thing comes next for you? And for the listeners that are listening to this show today, how can they then apply that to their lives?
Well, I've always been someone who wants to help and help others. But the example I gave earlier, sometimes you want to be helpful, but how you want to help is probably not the way that people need to be helped. So when I think about just the common thread, my grandfather always said, if you do good, good will follow you. I have, sometimes I call myself, when I'm talking to younger people about leadership, I always tell them I was the accidental leader. Shortly after my father passed away, my classmates were like, we want you to be our class representative. I'm like, why? Because I have good grades? Like, because I do my homework? They're like, no, we think that you're a leader. I didn't think I was a leader then. And I ended up being class president throughout high school. Then same thing in college. I ran for student government. I wasn't successful the first time, but I was successful every subsequent year. Like, I've been in a place where I know that I can be the connector between the students and the administration. I even did that in law school. I was a student bar association class rep. So it wasn't a big deal, a lot those people there, but walking from the law school to the parking lot, there was no crosswalk. It was no stripe. So after the third time I was getting hit by someone, I just said, you know what? I'm going to work with the administration to get these things striped so that we can be safe when we're walking from the law school. Lord knows I'm already under a lot of stress inside. I don't want to get hit walking to my car. And I was able to get that done. So like being able to talk to the people who can make decisions just really goes back to my training as a lobbyist, my training as a fundraiser. That was my first political work, was being a fundraiser for Howard Gentry's mayoral campaign. I didn't want to do that job. Mr. Gentry said, I need you to be my fundraiser. I said, I don't know how to fundraise. I'm going to teach you how to be a fundraiser. So that's the answer, being willing to learn things that you're uncomfortable with. That's the answer to it. Now as a fundraiser who, like, I lead a nonprofit, but guess what most of my work is? Fundraising, sponsorships, building connectivity with others. So like being in a place where you can do things that you didn't expect to do. I told you before, I never wanted to work at a law firm after my first year experience doing that. Then I get called to be a courtroom administrator, be a court administrator on the national board for court administration, won national and international awards for the work we were doing in the courts with expungements, with how you get access to justice. So like sometimes taking that chance to do some things that may not be what you plan to do with your life, but saying, I think I can do this with the right support. I think I always wanted to work in higher ed. I always loved the college piece. You shared your story. My first time going to a college classroom was when I visited New York the first time. I had a cousin who was a freshman in college. She said, hey, you want to come to college with me? Hopped in a car. We went to her college and she asked the teacher, can he sit in the classroom? And I was amazed as an elementary student at people I thought were grown-ups, just 18 years old, right? In there learning things. I was like, wow, that's cool. And then going to college and seeing my siblings go to college before me, I always felt like this is a place I want to be. It took me a while. I applied for a lot of jobs trying to work in higher ed. I didn't get it until the timing was right. And I'm forever grateful for my time at Vanderbilt. I think we did some great work. Loved my boss that I worked for, gave me a lot of latitude to be successful and was very supportive of things that I wanted to do. And it was a stretch thing. I grew in that position. And then after this one, this is not the easiest job. I talk to colleagues, even my good friend Yvette White from Leadership Nashville, she always jokes with me. She says, you know, Alfred, I'm so shocked that you're doing this work so young, because you have to deal with a lot of personalities. No different than when you work with a Metro Council or a legislature or somewhere, you have to deal with a lot of personalities. And I think that goes back to the difference between a manager and a leader. You can manage all day. That doesn't mean you're a leader. Like the hardest part of management to me is what? Personalities. It's not the work. It's managing people and motivating them to get things done. So my common thread more succinctly is understanding myself, understanding people, and figuring out how to cross the goal. And you have to give grace. I mean, you have to give grace because everybody's not equipped to do everything the way you want it to be done. But guess what? I can't do things the way that other people want me to do them all the time, right? So give grace and just be really helpful and lift as you climb. I'm so grateful. I thank God every day for my mentors, people that I talk to about things who have encouraged me to take different opportunities or go after things, even when I didn't think that I could do it. But people telling me, you can do this. You're built for it. Without that, I probably never would have taken chances or the risks, because it's always risks attached with taking on a new role. What if you can't do it? I'm grateful that I've been successful at the jobs I've had. But that's not the case for everybody. Sometimes you can be in the wrong position, and you have to understand that you're in the wrong position and figure out how to get out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, a big thank you to Dr. Alfred Degrafinreid for joining me today. His story is a reminder that leadership isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about listening, staying grounded, and using your voice when it matters most. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating and a review and share it with someone who you think would find it valuable. To To learn more about Leadership Tennessee and the work that they're doing to unite leaders across our state, visit leadershiptennessee.org. We've got more amazing guests coming this season, so be sure to subscribe to Catalysts for Change wherever you get your podcasts, or visit us at catalystforchangepod.com. Thanks again for listening to Catalysts for Change, brought to you in part by the Southern Research Collaborative. Until next time, I'm Adam Lister, and I'll see you soon.